They say betrayal doesn't begin with the act, it begins in silence. A message left undeleted. A glance that lingers too long or not at all. And sometimes the most painful part isn't the lie itself, but how long we chose to believe it. I'll never forget the look on Madison's face when I handed her my husband's suitcases right in front of her bewildered husband. That single moment of absolute shock, her perfectly mascara-lined eyes widening, her manicured hand flying to cover her mouth, was worth every second of the pain I'd endured. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Julia Carter, 39 years old, finance manager, and until 3 weeks ago I believed I was one half of a rock-solid 15-year marriage. My husband Ethan and I had moved to Riverbend Hills 2 years ago, a quiet, upscale neighborhood in Portland, Oregon, with tree-lined streets and houses spaced just far enough apart to give the illusion of privacy. The kind of place where neighbors wave when collecting the mail, but rarely know what's happening behind closed doors. Madison and Greg Barnes lived directly across from us. They were the picture-perfect couple. She was always impeccably dressed, not a single strand of her auburn hair ever out of place. He was successful in commercial development, armed with the kind of polished charm that closed multi-million-dollar deals. They welcomed us to the neighborhood with a bottle of wine and a tray of cookies that, as I later found out, Madison had bought from the gourmet shop on Main Street. That should have been my first clue about her authenticity. "You caught me at just the right time," I said to Ethan that fateful Thursday morning, my voice hollow as I stood in our bedroom doorway. The sheets were still rumpled from where I'd been sleeping alone. He froze, one hand mid-motion pulling on a sock, like a deer caught in headlights. "What are you talking about?" he asked, but his eyes. Those eyes. The same eyes I'd trusted for 15 years couldn't meet mine. In my hand, I held his phone. He'd left it on the kitchen counter while showering, and when it buzzed repeatedly with incoming texts, I did something I'd never done before. I looked, and what I saw shattered the foundation of everything I believed about my life. "You really should be more careful with your passcode," I said quietly, scrolling through months of exchanges between my husband and Madison Barnes. Explicit messages. Plans for their meetups. Inside jokes about sneaking around while Greg was away on business and I worked late. "Julia, I can explain," he started, but I cut him off. "Explain what exactly? How you've been sleeping with our neighbor for the past 8 months? How you told her our marriage was falling apart while you whispered I love you to me every night? Please, Ethan, explain." The air in the room felt thick, unbreathable. Outside, through our bedroom window, I could see Madison watering her plants on the front porch, completely unaware that her carefully constructed secret was crumbling. "It's not what you think," Ethan said, using that calming voice he always employed when trying to keep me from unraveling. I used to find it comforting. Now it made my skin crawl. "Really? Because I think you've been f***ing our neighbor whenever I'm not around." The vulgarity felt foreign on my tongue, but somehow necessary. "I think you've been lying to my face for months, while planning little rendezvous with a woman who waves to me every morning." Something shifted in me that morning. The initial shock had given way to a strange, eerie calm. I felt like I was watching myself from outside my body, observing this scene unfold like a spectator. "I was going to end it," he said, his voice cracking. It didn't mean anything." I laughed then, a harsh sound that even surprised me. "That's worse, Ethan. That means you risked everything we built together for something that didn't mean anything." He reached for me, but I stepped back. "Don't." I watched him struggle, searching for the right words that could possibly undo what had been done. There weren't any. "Does Greg know?" I asked. Ethan paled. "Of course not, Julia. Please, let's just talk about this. Just us. We can work through this." I stared at the stranger standing in front of me, the man who'd held my hand through my mother's funeral, the man who once drove 9 hours straight when I had a panic attack while traveling for work, the man who apparently could lead a double life without a flicker of remorse until he was caught. "You know what's fascinating?" I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I kept thinking something was off these past few months. I actually started therapy because I thought it was me, that I was being paranoid or too needy." I swallowed hard. I blamed myself for the distance between us. I questioned my own worth, retraced every conversation, every silence, every glance that lingered too long or didn't linger at all. I told myself I was being dramatic, insecure. I twisted myself into knots trying to be more understanding, more patient, more everything, just to hold together what I thought was still real. And all along, you were giving pieces of us away, like they meant nothing. Outside, Madison had finished watering her plants and went back inside her house, the house where my husband had apparently been a frequent visitor. "Apparently I'm going to work," I said finally. "And when I get home, I expect you to be gone, Ethan." "This is my house too," he protested, finally finding his backbone. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You're right, it is. So I'll make this simple. You have two choices. Leave temporarily while we figure this out, or I call Greg Barnes right now and blow your comfortable little arrangement to pieces." The color drained from his face. "You wouldn't." "Try me," I said, surprised by my own steely resolve. "You've clearly underestimated me for months. Don't make that mistake again." As I walked out of the room heading to work as if it were any normal day, something crystallized inside me. This wouldn't end with Ethan simply moving out. That would be too easy, too clean. No, this betrayal, this humiliation right under my own nose, deserved something far more fitting. I wasn't just going to end my marriage, I was going to expose their affair in a way neither of them would ever forget. That day at work passed in a blur. I sat through meetings, answered emails, and smiled at colleagues, while my mind raced through the last 8 months, recalibrating every memory with this new, terrible knowledge. The night Ethan said he needed to work late and came home smelling faintly of a perfume I didn't own. The weekend I went to visit my cousin, and he claimed to have a guy's fishing trip that mysteriously produced no fish and no photos. The time Madison would make oddly familiar comments about things in my life, Ethan must have shared them with her. All the signs had been there, waving like red flags in a hurricane, but I trusted him so completely that I'd rationalized each one away. I'd chalked it up to coincidence, to stress, to me being oversensitive. I had convinced myself that strong marriages ride out dry spells and distant conversations, that things would circle back, that love, real love, was a quiet, enduring thing. I didn't realize it was supposed to feel like respect, too. When I got home that evening, Ethan was sitting at our kitchen table, his face ashen. "I canceled my dinner meeting," he said, as if that somehow showed a grand commitment. "We need to talk about this." I set my purse down carefully. "Is that what you told Madison? That you needed to cancel your plans because your wife found out?" He flinched. "I haven't spoken to her." "Liar," I said calmly, pulling out my phone. I had installed a call monitoring app during my lunch break, something I never thought I'd do. But desperate times and all that. "You called her at 2:17 this afternoon. You talked for 6 minutes and 23 seconds. The shock on his face was almost satisfying. "How did you?" "Does it matter?" I interrupted. "What matters is, you're still lying to me. Even now." I sat down across from him. "I have one question, and I want the truth. Why her of all people? Why our neighbor?" Ethan's eyes fixed on the table. "It wasn't planned," he murmured. "It just happened." "Things don't just happen, Ethan. You made choices. Every single time." "She was there," he said softly. "When you were working late, when you were stressed about your promotion, she was just there." The casual cruelty of those words hit me like a physical blow, as if my ambition somehow excused his betrayal, as if my long hours were a void he had no choice but to fill. With her. He made it sound like I was absent, unreachable, when I was breaking myself to build something better for us both. I wasn't missing, I was building. And he decided comfort was more important than commitment. I had been working late to build a career that supported us both. The stress of that promotion had been partly because I wanted to contribute more to our future. "So this is my fault?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Because I was building a career, while you were, what? Feeling neglected?" "That's not what I meant," he backpedaled. "I'm trying to explain, not excuse." I stood up abruptly. "Pack your things. I don't care where you go, but you're not staying here tonight." "Julia, please. 15 years. Don't throw that away." His voice broke. "I made a terrible mistake. I'll do anything to fix this." For a split second, I faltered. 15 years was a long time. We'd built a life together. We'd talked about children. though that had never happened. We had history, intertwined families, joint bank accounts. Untangling all of that would be excruciating. The thought of unraveling the life we'd threaded together thread by thread made my throat tighten. There had been love here once, but love without loyalty is hollow, and I couldn't keep clinging to echoes of something that no longer protected me. But then I remembered the messages I'd read, the casual way they'd discussed their meetups, the laughing emojis Madison had sent when Ethan told her I was working late again. "Did you know," I said slowly, "that I turned down a promotion in Seattle last year because you said you couldn't bear to leave this house? This neighborhood?" The realization dawned as I spoke. Was that because of her? Did you manipulate my career so you could stay close to your mistress? His silence was answer enough. "Get out," I whispered. When he didn't move, I felt something snap inside me. "Get out," I screamed, loud enough that I was sure the neighbors could hear, including Madison. He scrambled to his feet, backing away from me like I was dangerous. And perhaps in that moment I was. "I'll get some things," he said quickly. "We'll talk tomorrow when we're both calmer." I watched him hurry upstairs, and a strange sense of clarity washed over me. In 15 years of marriage, I had never yelled at him like that. I had always been the reasonable one, the peacemaker, the one who compromised. Not anymore. While Ethan packed upstairs, I walked to our front window and stared across the street at the Barnes house. The lights were on, and I could see shadows moving behind the curtains. Was Madison panicking right now? Had Ethan warned her that I knew? My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Danielle. "Everything okay? You seemed off on our call earlier." I hadn't told anyone yet. Saying it out loud would make it real in a way I wasn't ready for. But as I watched Ethan descend the stairs with a hastily packed duffel bag, I knew I needed an ally. "Ethan's been cheating with our neighbor. Can you come over tomorrow?" Her response was immediate. "On my way now. Don't do anything I wouldn't do until I get there." That made me smile, however briefly. The list of things Danielle wouldn't do was remarkably short. "I'll be at the Marriott downtown," Ethan said, standing awkwardly by the door. "Please, call me tomorrow. We can work through this." I said nothing, just watched as he walked out of our home and drove away. Not to the Marriott, I was certain, but probably straight to Madison's waiting arms the moment Greg left on his business trip tomorrow. The thought made my blood boil. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, cataloging every lie, every betrayal. By morning, my sadness had crystallized into something harder, colder. But beneath that coldness, there was a flicker of something else. Fear. A whisper I didn't want to hear. Was I becoming someone I wouldn't recognize? I had always prided myself on grace under pressure, on taking the high road. What if this revenge, this calculated exposure, turned me into a version of myself I couldn't respect? For a moment, I wasn't sure if I was fighting for justice, or just trying to hurt him back. I knew exactly what I needed to do. When Danielle arrived, her fierce hug nearly broke me. "Tell me everything," she demanded. So I did, every sordid detail, every realization, every plan forming in my mind. "You're sure about this?" she asked when I finished. "It's extreme." "So is screwing the neighbor for 8 months," I replied. "They humiliated me, in my own home, in my own neighborhood. I'm just returning the favor." Danielle studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay then, let's get to work." What Ethan never understood about me, what he clearly underestimated, was my capacity for strategic thinking. You don't become a finance manager without knowing how to plan several steps ahead. First things first, I told Danielle as we sat at my kitchen table that morning. "I need to confirm Greg's schedule." "How are you going to do that without tipping off Madison?" she asked. I smiled thinly. "Because Greg and I have something in common. We both work too much. He posts his real estate open houses on the community Facebook page every week." Sure enough, a quick check confirmed Greg had open houses scheduled all day Saturday. Tomorrow. Perfect timing. "Now we need to get Ethan's things," I said. Danielle raised an eyebrow. "All of them?" "No, just enough to make a statement." We spent the morning selecting items from Ethan's closet. His favorite suits, the expensive watch I'd given him for our 10th anniversary, the monogrammed shirts his mother sent every Christmas. I packed them methodically into our largest suitcases, adding his toiletries, medications, and the framed photo of us from his nightstand. "What about this?" Danielle held up his passport. I considered it for a moment. Add it. He'll need it when he's living somewhere else. By noon, we had 3 large suitcases packed. I sent Ethan a text. I've packed some essentials for you. You can get the rest later. His reply came quickly. Thank you. Can we talk today? I didn't respond. Instead, I called my lawyer, a shark of a woman who had handled my company's contracts for years. She agreed to meet me that afternoon. You're not wasting any time, Danielle observed as I grabbed my keys. Why would I? They didn't. While Danielle stayed at the house, I met with my lawyer, Claudia, and laid everything out. She took detailed notes, her expression growing progressively darker. Digital evidence? She asked. I have screenshots of everything, I confirmed. And the phone records showing their calls. Claudia nodded approvingly. Good. What else do you need from me today? A preliminary separation agreement. And I want our accounts frozen. She studied me carefully. You're sure you don't want to attempt counseling first? The courts look more favorably. I'm not interested in what looks favorable, I cut in. I'm interested in what's fair. He betrayed me in our home, with our neighbor, for 8 months. He manipulated my career choices to facilitate his affair. I want him to feel this. Claudia's stern expression softened slightly. I understand. I'll have the paperwork ready by this evening. Back at home, Danielle had been busy. I did some digging, she announced. Madison's been quite the social media butterfly. Look. She showed me Madison's Instagram account, set to private, but Danielle had found a way in through a mutual acquaintance. There were dozens of photos from the past year that took on new meaning now. Madison at a restaurant Ethan had claimed to have never visited. Madison wearing a bracelet identical to one Ethan had said he bought for his mother. Madison on a weekend trip to the coast, during a time Ethan told me he was attending a conference. She's been flaunting it, I said, feeling sick. Right under everyone's noses. Not just that, Danielle added grimly. I think they've been using your house. What? She pointed to a photo of Madison holding a wine glass. In the background, barely visible, but unmistakable to me, was the unique tile backsplash from my kitchen. The realization hit me like a bucket of ice water. They hadn't just been sleeping together, they'd been bringing their affair into my home, when I was gone. Something cold and hard settled in my chest. Change of plans, I said quietly. We're not just packing his essentials, we're delivering them tomorrow. That night, I barely slept again, but this time, it wasn't grief keeping me awake, it was anticipation. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear. From my bedroom window, I watched Greg Barnes leave for his open houses, dressed in his real estate finest. An hour later, Ethan texted again. Can we meet for coffee to talk? I'm busy today. I'll let you know when I'm ready to talk. I could almost feel his frustration through the phone. Good. You sure about this? Danielle asked as we loaded the suitcases into my car. Absolutely. Or at least, I said it like I was. But as I closed the trunk and looked at those bags, filled with the contents of a life I thought I knew, my chest tightened. What if this backfired? What if Greg didn't believe me? What if I was about to walk into someone's home and make a scene that would only make me look unstable, bitter, jealous? I hated that fear, that flicker of doubt, but it was real. I wasn't afraid of Madison. I was afraid of not being believed, of being dismissed the way women so often are when they speak uncomfortable truths. What Ethan also didn't know was that, while he'd been sneaking around with Madison, I'd been making friends in the neighborhood too, including Eleanor Winters, the retired teacher who lived next door to the Barnes family. She happened to mention during one of our morning walks that Madison received frequent male visitors when Greg was away. Such a shame, Eleanor had said. Greg is such a nice man. At the time, I'd thought nothing of it. Now I realized Eleanor had been trying to tell me something. I'd texted Eleanor that morning. Is Madison home alone today? Her response came quickly. Yes, dear. Greg left for work. She's been home all morning. Everything all right? Everything's perfect. Would you mind texting me if she leaves? Of course. Danielle and I waited until the afternoon. No texts from Eleanor meant Madison was still home. No more texts from Ethan either. He'd probably given up for the day. Ready? Danielle asked as we pulled up across the street from the Barnes house. I took a deep breath. Ready. We unloaded the suitcases and rolled them up to the Barnes front door. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. But my hands were steady as I rang the doorbell. The wait seemed eternal. Then the door swung open. Madison Barnes stood there, her perfect smile faltering as she took in the sight of me, Danielle, and 3 large suitcases on her doorstep. "Julia," she said, confusion evident in her voice. "Is everything okay?" I smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. "Everything's wonderful, Madison. I've brought Ethan's things. Since he's spending so much time here, I thought he might need them." The color drained from Madison's face so quickly, I thought she might faint. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for water. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, one hand clutching the door frame for support. I tilted my head slightly. "No? That's strange, because according to the texts on his phone, you two have been quite intimate for months now." I pushed the largest suitcase forward with my foot. "His clothes, his toiletries. Oh, and this one." I patted the medium-sized case. "Has those monogrammed shirts you complimented him on, the ones his mother gave him." Her eyes widened at that specific detail. "A confirmation if I ever needed one." "Julia, please," she whispered, glancing frantically over her shoulder into the house. "This is what you think." "Oh, what do I think, Madison? That you've been sleeping with my husband in my bed when I'm not home? That you've been laughing behind my back at neighborhood barbecues? That you?" "What's going on here?" A deep voice interrupted my tirade. Greg Barnes appeared behind his wife, looking between us with growing concern. He was supposed to be at his open houses. The carefully constructed plan in my head began to crumble. Madison's face went from white to green. "Greg, you're home early. Open house was canceled," he said. "The sellers had a family emergency." His eyes fell on the suitcases, then back to me. "Julia, what's this about?" For a split second, I faltered. This wasn't how I'd planned it. Greg was supposed to be gone, and Madison was supposed to be alone when faced with the evidence of her betrayal. But seeing Greg, confused, blindsided, was like looking into a mirror of my own devastation just days earlier. His brows drawn tight, mouth slightly open, as though he couldn't form the questions fast enough. It wasn't just the disbelief on his face. It was the fracture, the breaking point arriving in real time. I remembered how it felt in my body, that first crushing truth. And now I was delivering it to him, not out of malice, but because it was his truth too. But something in Greg's confused expression, the same trusting bewilderment I'd felt just days ago, steeled my resolve. "Your wife has been having an affair with my husband for the past 8 months, I said clearly. "I found out on Thursday. I've brought his things here since this seems to be where he spends most of his time when you're working." The silence that followed was deafening. Greg's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something darker as he processed my words. "That's ridiculous," Madison finally sputtered. "Greg, she's clearly having some kind of breakdown. Is she?" Greg cut in, his voice dangerously quiet. He turned to me. "You have proof of this?" I pulled out my phone, opened the screenshots I'd taken, and handed it to him without a word. Madison lunged for it, but Danielle smoothly stepped between them. "Don't," my sister warned. Greg scrolled through the messages, his face hardening with each swipe. The explicit texts, the planning, the inside jokes at both our expenses. Each scroll deepened the storm on his face. There was a tremble at his jawline, a hollowing of his gaze that looked too familiar. I knew that pain, the grief that arrives before the anger, before the clarity. This was the moment the foundation cracks, and everything you thought was steady collapses inward. When he looked up, his eyes were cold. "How long?" he asked his wife. "Greg, please, I can explain." "How long?" he roared, making all of us flinch. Madison began to cry, mascara tracking down her cheeks. It just happened, Greg. It didn't mean anything." I laughed bitterly. "Funny, that's exactly what Ethan said." As if summoned by his name, a car screeched to a halt at the curb. Ethan jumped out, panic written across his face as he took in the scene on the Barnes' doorstep. "Julia, what are you doing?" he called, rushing toward us. Greg handed me back my phone and turned to face my husband. "I think your wife is delivering your belongings to their new home," he said, his voice eerily calm. "Since you've been so comfortable in mine." Ethan stopped in his tracks, looking from Greg to Madison to me. "Greg, listen, this isn't. If you say, this isn't what it looks like, I might actually punch you," Greg interrupted, because it looks exactly like you've been fucking my wife behind my back, behind Julia's back. He pointed to the suitcases. Take your and get off my property. Ethan's face crumpled. Madison, tell him. Tell him what? I asked, finding my voice again. That you've been planning weekend getaways together? That you've been in our bed when I'm not home? That you, my voice broke slightly, that you told her our marriage was failing while telling me everything was fine? A small crowd had begun to gather on the sidewalk, neighbors pretending to walk dogs or check the mail, all watching the drama unfold. Including Eleanor Winters, who gave me a small, sad nod of acknowledgement. Everyone is watching, Madison hissed, trying to pull Greg back inside. We need to talk about this, privately. No, Greg said firmly, shaking off her hand. I'm done with privacy and secrets. He turned to me. Did you know about this before Thursday? I shook my head. I had no idea. I found their messages on his phone. Greg nodded, a look of grim understanding passing between us. Fellow members of a club no one wants to join. Ethan, I said, turning to my shell-shocked husband, I've frozen our accounts. I filed separation papers. My lawyer will contact you on Monday. I gestured to the suitcases. You should take these. I assume you'll need somewhere to stay now that both your beds are unavailable to you. Ethan stared at me like he'd never seen me before. Perhaps he hadn't. Not really. Not this version of me that refused to be a silent, accommodating victim. You can't do this, he said weakly. I already have. Greg stepped forward, picked up the largest suitcase and shoved it hard into Ethan's chest. Take your things and leave. Now. The neighborhood watched in stunned silence as Ethan loaded his suitcases into his car. Madison had retreated inside the house, sobbing audibly. As Ethan drove away, Greg turned to me. I'm sorry, he said simply. Me too. Coffee sometime? He asked, surprising me. I think we might have a lot to talk about. Despite everything, I found myself nodding. I'd like that. As Danielle and I walked back to my car, the weight that had been crushing my chest since Thursday felt lighter. Not gone. The pain would linger for a long time, but transformed into something I could carry. You okay? Danielle asked, squeezing my hand. I looked back at the Barnes' house where Greg stood alone on the porch, looking as shell-shocked as I'd felt days earlier. No, I answered honestly, but I think I will be. 6 months passed. Seasons changed, wounds began to heal. The divorce was finalized faster than I expected. Ethan didn't fight it, couldn't, really, with the evidence stacked against him. I kept the house. He kept his guilt. Madison and Greg Barnes put their house on the market 3 weeks after that day on their doorstep. I heard they separated too, though Greg stayed in town while Madison moved back to her parents' place in Michigan. The neighborhood gossip eventually found new targets, though Eleanor Winters still brings me cookies occasionally, telling me how proud she is of my moxie. Ethan tried to contact me several times in those first few months. Apology texts. Emails explaining how he'd found himself through therapy. Once, flowers delivered to my office with a card begging for coffee. Just to talk. I donated the flowers to a nearby nursing home and never responded to any of his outreach. Every message from him felt like reopening a wound I had just begun to scab over. He wanted peace. He wanted closure. But I had learned that not every hurt needed to be cleaned up nicely. Some pain wasn't meant to be resolved with polite endings. Some wounds don't need closure. Some betrayals don't deserve forgiveness. What surprised me most was my friendship with Greg. That offer of coffee turned into weekly walks, then occasional dinners. 2 broken people finding comfort in the one person who truly understood their specific pain. There was no pressure to explain. We didn't tiptoe around the wreckage. We sat quietly in it. And somehow, that made it easier to breathe. With him, I didn't have to pretend I was fine. I didn't have to smile when I didn't feel like it. I just had to show up, and he did too. Do you think they were worth it? Greg asked one evening as we sat on my back porch watching fireflies dance in the summer dusk. To each other, I mean, was the affair worth losing all of this? I considered the question carefully. I don't think it was ever about worth, I finally replied. It was about convenience, opportunity, selfishness. He nodded slowly. I keep wondering if I missed signs, if I should have known. Me too, I admitted, but I've realized something. Their choices weren't a reflection of what we lacked. They were a reflection of what they lacked: integrity, courage, honor. Greg's hand found mine in the growing darkness, a gesture of understanding, not romance. Not yet. We were both still healing, still learning to trust again. The connection was quiet, careful. Two people learning not just how to trust someone else, but how to trust themselves again. And in that slow process, I'd had to face something else, a fear I thought I'd buried long ago. Growing up, I'd watched people leave. My father, my mother's sense of hope. I had built my adult life around making things work, holding on, fixing, bending, because the idea of being left again felt like failure. That fear had kept me in a marriage long after the cracks began, and maybe that's what hurt most of all, not just the betrayal, but how long I'd ignored my own instincts trying to avoid it. "I'm selling real estate in Colorado next month," he said after a comfortable silence. "A week-long trip, beautiful mountains, clean air, you should come." I turned to look at him, surprised. "As your friend," he said quickly. "Separate rooms. I think we both could use some perspective. Some distance from this place and its memories." I squeezed his hand gently. "I'd like that." Later that night, after Greg had gone home, I stood in my bedroom, the room I'd once shared with Ethan, and realized I'd gone a whole day without thinking of my ex-husband, without feeling that sharp stab of betrayal, without wondering what I could have done differently. And that realization didn't feel loud or triumphant. It felt quiet, solid, like a corner had finally been turned without me even noticing it. Progress comes in small moments. Healing happens in quiet spaces between heartbeats. I picked up my phone and texted Danielle. "I think I'm going to Colorado next month." Her response came immediately. "With neighbor guy?" "Yes, as friends, for now." I smiled at her teasing, then walked to the window that overlooked what used to be the Barnes house. New owners had moved in last month, a young couple with a toddler and another baby on the way. I'd welcomed them with wine and store-bought cookies, making no claims about baking them myself. The truth I've learned is always simpler than lies. I don't know what the future holds with Greg, with my career, or with this house full of complicated memories. But I know this. I survived the worst betrayal I could imagine, and I emerged stronger. Not unscathed, but unbroken. Sometimes, when life hands you heartbreak, you don't just survive it, you use it to build something new, something honest, something real. And sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't in the moment of exposure, but in the quiet dignity of rebuilding your life without the ones who tried to destroy it. I closed the curtains on my old view and turned toward whatever comes next. Dear friend, sometimes life breaks us where we least expect it. Not with noise, but in the quiet unraveling of trust. But as the Stoics taught us, it's not what happens to us that defines our lives, it's how we respond. Pain is inevitable, but suffering, that's a choice. And healing, though slow, is proof of our agency. If someone you loved has broken you, know this: you are still whole beneath the cracks. What was lost wasn't your worth, but the illusion of who they pretended to be. Let your grief teach you grace. Let your silence become strength. And when you rebuild, don't aim for perfection. Aim for peace. You are not broken. You are becoming. If this story moved you, it would mean the world if you'd give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories that speak to the heart.